It was already 7:24 a.m. on July 7th, 2026. The morning air over Whitechapel, East London, carried the familiar scent of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and the distant hum of buses beginning another busy day. I had followed the same routine for nearly 12 years. Every weekday, I walked down Whitechapel Road toward my small coffee shop, greeting familiar faces along the way. Life had become so predictable that I rarely expected anything unusual to happen before I unlocked the front door. As I approached the junction near East London Mosque, I noticed an unusually large gathering of Muslims praying together in an open area beside the road. Some stood quietly while others bowed in unison, their voices low and calm, despite the growing tension that had filled the city for weeks. News channels had been filled with heated debates about immigration, protests, and rumors surrounding Sharia law. Social media was even worse. Every scroll seemed to reveal another angry argument, another alarming headline, another prediction that Britain was on the brink of something much bigger. I was an ordinary Christian. I wasn't a politician, a journalist, or an activist. My faith was personal, and my biggest concern most mornings was whether my regular customers would arrive before the pastries sold out. Yet something about that morning felt different. Police vans were already parked along the streets. Officers stood watch at nearly every major intersection. Metal barriers had appeared where there had been none the day before, and helicopters circled high above the rooftops. Even people drinking coffee outside nearby cafes kept glancing over their shoulders as if they were waiting for something to happen. A customer who often visited my shop hurried past me and whispered, "You should head home today. They're expecting another protest by noon." Before I could ask what he meant, he disappeared into the crowd. For the next few hours, business was unusually slow. Most people ordered their drinks to take away, speaking in hushed voices about demonstrations planned for central London. Around lunchtime, curiosity got the better of me. I locked the cafe early and decided to walk toward the protest area. I wasn't going there to support anyone. I simply wanted to see with my own eyes whether the stories flooding the internet were true. The closer I got, the louder everything became. Hundreds of protesters stood behind police barriers waving flags and holding signs. Across from them, counter-protesters answered with chants of their own. Officers formed long lines between the two groups, doing everything they could to keep them apart. At first, it looked like nothing more than angry shouting. Then, in a single moment, everything changed. A bottle flew through the air. Someone screamed. People began running in every direction. Within seconds, the noise became deafening. Smoke filled part of the street. More objects were thrown. Families pulled children away as officers rushed toward the growing violence. Fear spread through the crowd faster than the shouting itself. I turned to leave, but then I saw an elderly man lying motionless on the pavement. Blood was running from a wound on his forehead while people rushed past him without stopping. I couldn't just leave him there. I knelt beside him and called for help, pressing my jacket against his head to slow the bleeding. "Stay with me," I kept saying, though I wasn't even sure he could hear me. That was when I heard tires screeching. Before I could turn around, something struck me with incredible force. Everything went black. The next thing I remember was hearing faint voices somewhere far away. "Charge to 200. "Clear!" A violent shock surged through my body. Then nothing. Later, doctors told my family that I had suffered catastrophic injuries and gone into cardiac arrest shortly after arriving at the hospital. For 3 hours, the trauma team fought to bring me back. They did everything modern medicine could offer. But according to every monitor in that room, my heart had stopped. The darkness didn't last. Instead of sinking into nothingness, I became aware that I was still conscious. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining things. I was more awake than I had ever been in my entire life. I opened my eyes and found myself standing several feet above a hospital bed. Below me lay my own body. Doctors and nurses surrounded me, moving with incredible urgency. One nurse counted compressions while another prepared medication. A defibrillator discharged again, causing my lifeless body to jolt violently against the mattress. "Come on. Don't lose him," I heard someone say. I tried to tell them I was standing right there. I shouted. I waved my arms. No one looked up. It was as though I no longer belonged to the world I had always known. Then everything around me began to dissolve. The walls of the intensive care unit faded like morning mist. The voices became distant echoes until they disappeared completely. A warmth unlike anything I had ever experienced surrounded me. Not the warmth of sunlight or fire, but something alive. It carried a peace so complete that every fear, every memory of pain, and every anxious thought simply melted away. I was no longer in the hospital. I found myself standing in a place that words can barely describe. There was no visible sun, yet everything was filled with brilliant light. The ground beneath me seemed more solid than stone, yet lighter than anything on earth. Colors existed there that I had never seen before. The air itself seemed alive with joy. I wanted to stay forever. As I looked into the distance, a figure approached. The closer he came, the brighter everything became. His light did not hurt my eyes. Instead, it seemed to reveal everything about me, every thought I had ever hidden, every selfish motive, every act of kindness, every lie, every prayer, every moment of pride, and every moment of compassion. Nothing was concealed, yet I felt no desire to run. His presence was unlike anything I had ever known. It was absolute holiness, perfect authority, and indescribable love at the same time. Without anyone introducing him, I knew. It was Jesus. The moment our eyes met, I fell to my knees. Not because I was forced to, because every part of me recognized that I was standing before the one who had created me. I expected condemnation. Instead, I felt a love deeper than the oceans, stronger than death itself. When he spoke, his voice carried both gentleness and power. "My child," he said, "look." Suddenly, scenes unfolded before me as though I were watching history itself. I saw streets filled with protests, crowds shouting at one another, families frightened, people divided by politics, religion, race, nationality, and ideology. Some claimed to be defending truth. Others believed they were fighting for justice. Nearly everyone believed they were completely right. Then something changed. The crowds became transparent. I no longer saw banners or slogans. I saw hearts. Some hearts were darkened by hatred, others by pride. Some were consumed by fear. Others burned with bitterness, revenge, prejudice, or the desperate desire for power. What shocked me most was that these things were not limited to one group of people. They appeared in people from every background. Some called themselves Christians. Some were Muslims. Some believed in no religion at all. Yet the same darkness could take root wherever hearts surrendered to anger instead of truth and love. Jesus looked at me with sorrow. Many judge others while refusing to examine themselves. As he spoke, I realized something that pierced me more deeply than anything else. I had spent weeks watching news reports, reading comments online, and quietly deciding who I thought was right and who was wrong. But I had rarely asked God to search my own heart. Then another vision appeared. I saw ordinary people, shopkeepers, teachers, police officers, parents, students, each standing alone before a brilliant light. No crowds. No political movements. No national flags. No religious labels. Only one person at a time. Each life was revealed exactly as it had been lived. No one was judged because of the nation they came from. No one was declared righteous because they belonged to a particular community. Every person stood accountable for their own choices, their own words, and the condition of their own heart. As I watched, an overwhelming understanding settled over me. God does not measure people by the groups they belong to, but by the truth of their hearts and the way they respond to Him. Then Jesus turned towards me once more. There was both compassion and deep seriousness in His eyes. "My child," He said softly, "there is something more I must show you." Jesus raised His hand, and the scenes before me changed once again. This time, I was no longer watching a single city. It was as though I could see nations from above, streets filled with people, government buildings, places of worship, schools, homes, millions of lives unfolding at the same time. At first, everything appeared normal. Then I noticed something spreading through the crowds. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't darkness. It was something far more dangerous. It moved from heart to heart like an invisible fire. Fear. One frightened person influenced another. Suspicion became hostility. Hostility became hatred. Hatred eventually erupted into violence. Entire communities began viewing one another as enemies before they had even exchanged a single word. I watched neighbors stop trusting neighbors. Families turned against one another over political arguments. Friends who had known each other for years suddenly refused to speak because they stood on opposite sides of a debate. Then the vision shifted again. I saw religious leaders standing before crowds. Some spoke with humility, encouraging compassion, truth, and repentance. But others twisted sacred words to gain influence, stir anger, or strengthen their own authority. They used faith not to draw people closer to God, but to deepen division and fear. The vision widened. I saw politicians doing the same. Commentators, influencers, even ordinary people online. Many had convinced themselves that if they shouted loudly enough or hated fiercely enough, they were serving a righteous cause. Yet every angry word seemed to feed the invisible fire I had seen spreading through human hearts. I looked at Jesus, struggling to understand. Lord, I asked, is this because of one religion? Is this because of one political movement? Is this because of one nation? His eyes met mine. There was no anger in his face, only grief. The human heart, he said, has always been the greatest battlefield. Those words echoed through me with overwhelming weight. I realized I had been asking the wrong question. I wanted to know which group was responsible. Jesus was showing me something much deeper. Whenever pride replaces humility, whenever fear overcomes compassion, whenever hatred is celebrated instead of challenged, darkness finds room to grow. It does not matter whether a person claims to be religious or not. No title, tradition, or ideology can make a heart righteous if it refuses truth, mercy, and repentance. Then another scene unfolded before me. I saw people from many backgrounds helping one another during moments of crisis. A Christian lifting an injured stranger from the street. A Muslim shielding a frightened child from danger. A police officer risking his own life to protect people he had never met. Volunteers handing out food to families who had lost everything. The light surrounding these acts shone brilliantly. I understood that every genuine act of mercy reflected the heart of God. Jesus turned toward me again. My children were never called to rejoice in hatred, he said. They were called to be peacemakers, to speak truth with humility, and to love even when it is difficult. As he spoke, I felt the weight of my own failures. There were people I had judged without knowing them. Conversations I had entered with pride instead of grace. Moments when I had been more interested in winning an argument than reflecting the love of Christ. I fell to my knees. Lord, have mercy on me. His expression did not change. It remained full of compassion. Mercy is still available, he said. Hope remains while hearts are willing to seek truth, turn from sin, and love their neighbor. The words settled deep within my soul. Then the glorious light around us began to fade. The peace that surrounded me slowly gave way to the sound of distant voices. The last thing I remember before everything disappeared was Jesus looking at me and saying, "Go back. Tell them not to let fear overcome love, nor anger overcome truth. Tell them there is still time to turn to me."
The next sound I heard was a loud, continuous beeping. It was sharp enough to cut through the silence. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but I forced them open. Bright white lights blurred above me. The ceiling slowly came into focus, followed by unfamiliar faces moving rapidly around my bed. Someone shouted, "She's awake." Another voice called for a doctor. Within seconds, the room was filled with people. Nurses hurried to adjust the monitors, while physicians stared at the screens in disbelief. I could hear them speaking to one another, but their words sounded distant, as though my mind was still caught between two worlds. Then I turned my head. Standing near the foot of the bed was my mother. Tears streamed down her face before she rushed to my side and held my hand so tightly that I could barely feel my fingers. My father stood behind her, trying to remain composed, but I could see that he had been crying as well. For as long as I could remember, I had never seen him look so vulnerable. No one understood why I was alive. The doctors explained that my heart had stopped and that every effort to revive me had seemed hopeless. They had reached the point where they believed there was nothing more they could do. Then, without warning, my heart began beating again. Several members of the medical team described it as extraordinary. Some simply called it a miracle. As they celebrated what they believed was an impossible recovery, I remained silent. How could I possibly explain where I had been? How could I describe a realm beyond human language? How could I tell them that while they were fighting to save my body, I had been standing outside it, speaking with an archangel, watching my entire life unfold before me? For weeks, I told no one. Even after leaving the hospital, I smiled politely whenever people congratulated me on my recovery. They believed I had survived a medical emergency. Only I knew that I had returned carrying a message I never asked to receive. The greatest struggle was not remembering what I had seen. It was deciding whether I should speak about it. Because of my family's position, every word I spoke carried consequences. My identity had to remain protected, not only for my own safety, but for the safety of those I love. There were moments when I considered remaining silent forever. But every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the archangel's final words. Do not waste the life that has been returned to you. Those words became impossible to ignore. Little by little, my priorities began to change. The things that once seemed so important no longer held the same power over me. Luxury became less impressive. Recognition became less valuable. Arguments that once consumed my thoughts suddenly felt insignificant. I discovered that the richest people are not always those who possess the most, but those who love the most. I became more patient with those who served around me. I learned to listen instead of always speaking. I found myself thanking people for the smallest acts of kindness because I now understood that nothing done with genuine love is ever wasted. Most importantly, I began seeking God with a sincerity I had never known before, not because of fear, not because of expectation, but because I had caught a glimpse of a reality greater than this world, and I never wanted to lose sight of it again. If there is one lesson my experience taught me, it is this: life is far more fragile than we believe. None of us knows when our final breath will come. The titles we fight for, the wealth we accumulate, the applause we chase, and the reputation we spend years protecting will all remain behind one day. What continues beyond this life is the condition of our hearts. The love we gave, the mercy we showed, the forgiveness we chose, the compassion we extended to people who could offer us nothing in return. Those are treasures that death cannot erase. I cannot force anyone to believe my testimony. You may choose to accept it, question it, or dismiss it completely. That decision belongs to you. But I ask you to consider one question that has never left my own heart since the day I returned. If your life ended today, what legacy would your soul leave behind? Would you be remembered only for what you achieved, or for how deeply you loved? If my story causes even one person to forgive someone they have been holding bitterness against, to show compassion where they once showed indifference, to seek God with a sincere and humble heart, then every difficult moment of sharing this testimony will have been worthwhile. My name is Samaria. For reasons of security, that is all I can reveal. I was a princess who believed she understood life until I crossed the boundary between time and eternity. I returned with no desire for fame, no wish to start arguments, and no ambition to prove myself right. I returned with a simple message: love sincerely, walk humbly, seek God while you still have breath. Because one day, every one of us will stand where titles disappear, masks fall away, and only the truth of our hearts remains.